Global trade in timber and wood products is a $1 trillion industry. As much as 15% comes from illegal or suspicious sources. Enormous consumer markets like the United States, Europe, and Japan create the demand. For international timber traders, profits are high and risks are low. The consequences for forests and local communities have been devastating. But now, things are changing. In May 2008, the U.S. Congress passed a groundbreaking amendment to the Lacey Act. With this change, the United States became the first country in the world to ban the import, export, and sale of illegal wood products.
The United States is the biggest consumer of wood products in the world and imports from just about anywhere, including the who's who's list of worst countries that have problems with illegal logging. These countries have enormous problems and are trying to get to grips with the problem of illegal logging, but unfortunately, the high profits that can be had for the illegal materials in the United States are undermining their efforts.
In a global economy, the distance between raw materials and final products can hide the impacts of our consumer demand. But luxury hardwoods and cheap wood products take a toll on forests and people around the world. In Indonesia, the government estimates that in the last 10 years, it's lost over $20 billion in revenue from illegal logging. Well-connected timber barons have ransacked national parks and other state lands, contributing to massive forest fires and destroying prime orangutan habitat. The industry's rush for wood, like ramen or merbau, has led to exploitation and conflict. Criminal syndicates in neighboring countries like Malaysia and Singapore launder wood for Western markets, aided by corrupt payments and falsified documents.
It's very difficult to compete with illegally logged wood. In Indonesia, it costs about $85 per cubic meter to log legal wood and about $35 to log illegal wood. And therefore, the playing field is simply not level for companies that are trying to play by the rules.
Increasingly, China is the first stop for high-risk timber. Lacking enough domestic wood supply to feed its booming industry, China relies on a constant stream of imported material. Much of this comes from the world's illegal logging and biodiversity hotspots, like the temperate forests of the Russian Far East. These forests are home to the critically endangered Siberian tiger and to some of the most lawless logging anywhere on Earth. Enough logs to fill 3.5 football fields cross the border from Russia to China every day. From China, factories ship furniture, baby cribs, even toilet seats to major buyers worldwide. In 2007, when EIA conducted undercover investigations here, almost none of the manufacturers knew any details about where their wood material came from. Across the ocean in Latin America, the feverish demand for highly lucrative tropical timbers like mahogany and cedar has fueled systematic illegality, corruption, and conflict between loggers and indigenous people. The vast majority of precious woods from countries like Peru, Nicaragua, and Bolivia end up as luxury furniture and doorways in the U.S. Meanwhile, in Honduras, grassroots activists battle powerful timber barons to stop illegal pine logging on their community lands. Who is buying this illegal wood? The U.S., which imports almost 40% of Honduran wood product exports. The impact of this consumption and trade is felt by U.S. forests and communities as well.
This is a dire situation. We are talking about 69,000 workers to date that have lost their job because the furniture plants are leaving this country to chase cheap wood, going after illegally logged timber. Something's got to be done.
For over 100 years, the Lacey Act has been an important tool of the U.S. government in the fight against wildlife crime.
I think fundamentally it's a very flexible law. So as underlying laws change, the Lacey Act automatically adapts to them. It allows us to reach out and support both state and foreign governments in their efforts to protect these species. And most fundamentally, it is very effective because the U.S. is such a huge marketplace.
Despite the Act's long history, its potential to combat illegal logging remained untapped until now. In 2007, Representative Earl Blumenauer and Senator Ron Wyden championed an amendment to the Lacey Act that expanded the law to cover plants. With this relatively simple change, the Lacey Act became a powerful prohibition on the import and commerce of illegal timber in the U.S. A broad coalition of industry, environmental, and labor groups helped to pass this landmark amendment into law. The Lacey Act plant provisions do three basic things. 1. Prohibit trade in illegally sourced plants and products containing plants. 2. Require importers to submit a declaration for plant products. 3. Establish tough penalties for violating the law. There are three critical elements to violating the prohibition on trade in illegally sourced plants and products. First, the traded good must meet the definition of a plant. The Lacey Act broadly defines a plant to include any part or product of any wild member of the plant kingdom, with some limited exceptions. So, for example, plantation trees, furniture, and paper are all covered. Common food crops and cultivars, live plants, and scientific specimens are not.
It's not just the planks of timber that one might think of, but it will include processed products, furniture, picture frames, sporting equipment, parts of products where a product might be mostly metal but it's got some inlaid wood, things like that.
Second, the plant must be illegally sourced. An illegally sourced plant is one that has been harvested or transported in violation of a relevant law in any foreign country or the U.S. This includes laws that regulate parks and officially protected areas, annual harvest permits, taxes, or export restrictions. Third, an act of trade must occur.
It's a two-step process. It is first taken, possessed, transported, or sold in violation of some underlying law, and then it moves somewhere.
The Lacey Act also asks importers to declare the species' scientific name, the volume, the value and country of harvest for any plant or product made with plants. These official declarations will expose what wood is coming into the U.S. and allow agencies to better enforce the law. The Lacey Act system of penalties creates new risks and incentives for traders of wood and plant products.
If somebody knew that a piece of wood was cut in violation of a foreign country's laws, and they knowingly then imported it into the United States, that would be a felony violation. The least consequence for a Lacey Act violation would be a forfeiture of the product alone, with no repercussions for the individual or the corporation involved in the import. Now, in between those two extremes, you have misdemeanor violations, you have civil penalty violations, all of which depend in some part on the type of activity involved, but more importantly on the level of knowledge of the person acting. Did they exercise due care? What did they really know about the product? What was their real culpability level?
So how do companies comply? The Lacey Act does not require any one type of document that proves compliance. Rather, the U.S. government is responsible for finding out the underlying facts about whether a plant was illegally sourced and whether a company exercised what's called due care. Due care is a flexible standard which a company meets by making its best effort to ask appropriate questions and comply with all relevant laws. Companies that want to practice due care should implement solid supply chain principles. Know your sources. Simplify your supply chains. Adopt a sound tracking system. And verify the legality of your wood to the extent possible. Companies that readily comply with the Lacey Act will have better access to markets elsewhere too, since the European Union and other nations are beginning to implement similar demand-side measures for illegal wood.
Anyone involved in manufacturing at this juncture should be asking questions of their suppliers, and if at all possible, asking for actual proof, actual evidence that the product they are purchasing, that they're spending good money for, was legally sourced.
Nobody asked me to smuggle. Who is the buyer? Important. Who is the buyer? No buyer, no smuggling.
Corruption, crime, and exploitation are all too common in today's global timber trade. Cleaning this industry up is a big job. It will require the combined efforts of governments upholding their laws, of companies investing in forest and supply chain management, of watchdog groups creating a global information network to fight forest crimes, and of communities working with allies to create more sustainable alternatives.
We think that the signal sent from a U.S. market will be critical in convincing practices as far afield as China and Indonesia and Africa and Central America. And it will also be an important guide for how other consuming countries will approach the problem. We think that this law could be a sea change for how forests are governed around the world.